Hey everybody, and welcome to the Fro Football Podcast, Episode 1. Today's podcast is brought to you by A&B Education, bringing intercultural education to talented students from around the world. Hello everyone, this is week's Fro Football Podcast. This week we'll look at the playoff picture as things start to come together and take a look into the crystal ball so that we can try to discuss the impact of some of the new injuries across the NFL and what those are going to do for the playoffs, and the future of some of the franchises for those teams who aren't necessarily going to make it to the postseason. We're going to start off today talking about the playoff races around the league. With most of the divisions are pretty much set and ready to go, where there's a few exceptions, but most of them, you know, they're kind of what we've seen coming. Most of us suspected all along the biggest obstacle for pretty much every team in the NFL in January is going to be those New England Patriots. You know, they've found a way to accentuate the positives around their players, kind of hide the weaknesses as much as possible. You know, they've got a gritty defense, surprisingly effective aging running back. You know, you gotta love LeGarrette Blount. No matter how old the guy gets, he seems to keep getting better. Wide receivers who are really outperforming anybody's expectations. You know, they seem to be able to make a star out of just about anybody. And they, as everybody knows, they've arguably got the best quarterback to ever lace up a pair of cleats. You know, love him or hate him, cheater or not, Tom Brady pretty much is the man. You know, the Patriots are on a collision course with the Super Bowl unless somebody can get in their way. And unfortunately, despite all the performances of some of the other teams out there in the playoff race, there is really nobody who looks like they have a chance against Brady and Belichick. You know, that tandem of coach and quarterback has been together for so long and is so effective, it looks like it's firing on all cylinders once again, and they're on a collision course for Super Bowl. For a while there, it looked like the Raiders were going to make an attempt to throw a wrench into the plans, but unfortunately, as everybody in the football world has heard recently, Derek Carr is down. You know, we're going to talk about a lot more of that later, but, you know, there are very few teams remaining to have any kind of realistic chance to put up a big enough challenge to the Patriots, and the Raiders might have been the last team that really could have done that. After the Patriots, the rest of the field showcases the parity, really, across the league. You know, perennial powerhouses like the Panthers and the Cardinals, the Saints, they're out. No matter how much they do, no matter how many great numbers they put up against some of the really tough teams out there, they're all out of the playoffs. Some of the historically mediocre teams have made a push. They're looking to make some noise in the postseason instead of the norm. The Raiders, the Chiefs. You know, the Steelers are in there quite often, but even the Steelers had some issues earlier in the season. Now we've got the Texans and the Dolphins rounding out the AFC. None of them really striking fear in their opponents with all that much talent that makes them look like they're something that could beat the Patriots. Right now it looks like the first round of the playoffs will be very entertaining. A lot of very similar teams, a lot of similar strengths and weaknesses, but at the end of the day, there's nobody who looks like they have the kind of firepower and capability that those Patriots have. So it'll be interesting to see the first round, see how exciting some of the games will be. I, for one, am looking forward to see what the Raiders can do now that Carr is out. But love to see Andy Reid in the postseason. He has a great track record with, you know, his previous stints with the Philadelphia Eagles, and now he's showing some consistency with the Chiefs. Let's just hope they can get over the hump there and try to make a push in the playoffs. But otherwise, you got to look at just people who historically don't seem to be in the playoff picture really putting the push. The Dolphins, the Texans. Neither of those, we've spent a good part of the year talking about the inadequacies of Brock Osweiler and what a horrible investment $72 million was in a quarterback who hasn't done anything important all year. And somehow the Texans, despite Osweiler's shortcomings, have found themselves in a playoff picture. When you look at the NFC, same thing, parity everywhere. You got the Cowboys and the Falcons, who really, they're of all the teams left in the NFL, they're the two teams that might strike some fear in Tom Brady. There's really not much out there. The Falcons are putting up monstrous numbers every week on offense, but the reality is they've given up a whole lot of points on defense too. And if the one person you don't want to get into a shootout with is Tom Brady, and that's something I fear for the Falcons if they make it to the Super Bowl. You look on the other side, when you look at the Cowboys, young superstars. That's what the team's built on. You've got the big Ezekiel Elliott. You got a power running back hoping to break the rookie rushing record this week. We'll see if they pull him too early and don't let him get to that. And you got Dak Prescott. Dak looks great. Dak's a solid quarterback. He's proving a lot this year, but you have to wonder to yourself, is Dak Prescott really the star that the NFL is seeming to think he is, or is this something where he is sitting behind one of the most amazing offensive lines ever put together in the NFL? And is that really the reason they were seeing the success in Dak Prescott that we are? Now, not to take away from Dak Prescott, but he is surrounded by tons of talent outside of just Ezekiel Elliott. You've got Dez Bryant, who looks to be finally fully healthy, ready to go. Had a career day the other day. You got Cole Beasley. Cole Beasley is a player that so many teams overlooked in the draft, and now look at the man. The man is a solid go-to wide receiver. You've got the ageless wonder, Jason Witten, who's still putting up stats all these years after he's been playing. It's just an amazing team top to bottom. We'll get into some other stressors for that team, though, a little bit later, because they, too, have been bit by the injury bug, which could pose a problem for them. But when you look around the rest of the NFC, there's little to be afraid of. You got the Giants and Seahawks. They've already punched their tickets to the postseason. That we have to wait and see where the chips fall for the Lions and the Packers, the Redskins, even the Buccaneers. Even the Buccaneers still have a chance to make the playoffs. They need a lot of help, monumental amount of help, but even they have a chance. The NFC, despite having two of the strongest teams sitting atop the conference, are a group of mediocre teams. It'll be interesting to see if Aaron Rodgers can keep up the recent magic, or will we see some of that old issues that popped up earlier in the season? Is somebody else going to reach up and grab the brass ring? If they find a way to make it in, I'll be honest with you, I really like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a sleeper team to make some serious noise in the postseason. It'd take a virtual miracle for them to make it into the playoffs in general. But when you take a look at their team top to bottom, they do have a very good defense. They have young players who are hungry. They have desire for success, and they really want to be something. You've got Jameis Winston, who is really, in his young career, made tons of waves and has put on some great performances against some tough teams. And you put him in his tandem with Mike Evans. Mike Evans, classy football player, great football player, and the two of them create matchup problems for defensive coordinators all over the league. Moving on, let's take a look at some of the injuries. The reports out of the Raiders facility this week indicate that the upper brass are confident that Matt McGloin could be their starting quarterback in the postseason, at least in the early stages. Which, that's either them just blowing smoke and trying to tone down the real fire that they're trying to put out, which is the fear that they can go nowhere without Derek Carr, or it's a testament to really the amazing drafting and the off-season moves they've made in the recent years, and no one is happier than Derek Carr, who reportedly has penciled in the Super Bowl as his return date from his broken leg. Now, the reports that came out this morning actually indicated that him coming back for the Super Bowl, even if they made it that far, are very much a long shot. But far be it from me to doubt any player, certainly one of Carr's skill level, but he's definitely taking a risk by coming back so quickly if the opportunity presents itself. Then again, who could really blame the guy? If they get eliminated early, he looks like the warrior who wanted to make a valiant comeback if they make it to the Super Bowl and make it to the big dance. Everyone would shower him with adoration for being the toughest SOB in the NFL today. On the flip side, if they make it to the Super Bowl, he's got the poetic story. He's got the perfect story to tell. I went down with injury week 16. I came back and we find a way to make the big dance. So great story waiting to happen there. We'll have to keep our eyes on that and see what happens. As for the rest of the league, this was like one of those weeks where injuries just seem to add up for everybody. Tyler Lockett in Seattle. Tyler Lockett has emerged as a solid number 2 wide receiver and probably the third receiving option on that team behind Doug Baldwin and behind Jimmy Graham. But he has been such a contributor, and now broken tibia and fibula out for the rest of the season. Serious situation. Hopefully he can come back. They're saying there's no serious ligament damage, and we wish him a speedy recovery and to get back in time for next season. In the San Francisco 49ers, you got Carlos Hyde, who, despite the fact that you're looking at a team that really went nowhere this year, Carlos Hyde has been a very positive spot for that team. Unfortunately, with him having the MCL issue and with their team really having little to no talent around him, you have to wonder, are the 49ers really going to take the time to invest in a guy who has a serious knee injury like this? Or are they going to look elsewhere in the draft? Chip Kelly being on the team, who knows what's going on inside his crazy wizard head. His his focus may be on moving on from Hyde. We'll have to keep our eyes on that. Tyler Eifert. Oh my goodness. Talk about a guy. Incredible talent, can't stay healthy. You know, you have to wonder for the Cincinnati Bengals how things might be different this offseason, this postseason coming up, if we had A.J. Green and Tyler Eifert from the start of the season going forward. Unfortunately, Eifert can't stay healthy. When he finally gets healthy, A.J. Green going down to his injury, and now that A.J. Green looks to be able to come back, Eifert is hurt again, back on the IR. Horrible situation for Cincinnati, and they're really going to have to take a look at him as if whether or not he's a injury risk or someone they want to invest in long term. Back to the Cowboys, Terrell McClain, Ryan Davis, Anthony Brown, players going down all over the place this weekend. Not a good sign for a team that's young and hungry and who's really on the cusp of something special. We got to hope that those three players can make it back in time for their playoff matchup. Still waiting to see who that's going to be against, but it really doesn't matter. We need all those players out on the field to have a legitimate shot to do something really special and make some history. One of the big names that went down over the weekend, Marcus Mariota. This young man is such a talented quarterback. Took a team that really, if you look at on paper, the Tennessee Titans had almost no talent around them for the majority of the year. Marcus Mariota was able to keep them in the playoff hunt and make them a legitimate playoff contender right up until his injury. Now we're going to see, going forward how he's going to heal. They're saying 5 to 6 months before he'll be back on the field. This is a serious injury. They're putting plates in his leg. Heavy duty stuff, but we wish, of course, Marcus Mariota a speedy recovery. The Titans are on such an upswing since against everything they've done in recent history, and it would be really nice to see that team be able to come together and move forward, and for Mariota to be a part of that. On the opposite side of things, someone who has not made a major impact yet, but you have to wonder, what their future holds. Bryce Petty. You come into the season, you're sitting on the bench behind two established quarterbacks. We've seen nothing but horrible gameplay from Ryan Fitzpatrick all year. Geno Smith going down early in the year. Bryce Petty pushed into action, trying to take advantage of those reps, and unfortunately, Bryce Petty now out for the rest of the season as well. I think the Jets, of all the teams in the NFL, may have the most crazy and completely unsettled quarterback situation, and something they really are going to have to consider going into the draft with a very preferential draft pick next year, and we'll have to see what they do. And TJ Yeldon, I hate to put him on this list, but TJ Yeldon, in all reality, in the time he's been in Jacksonville, just has not impressed. There was so much potential there. So many people thought he was going to be something of value, something really important, and it just hasn't happened. And on IR again, this is a player. If I was the brass at the Jaguars headquarters, I would have to think about moving on from TJ Yeldon. They really need to get their hands on a firm, solid running back. They have not been able to do that in the past several years, whether it's Denard Robinson or Yeldon or any of the other backs that they've brought in. It just hasn't happened. So we got to keep our eyes on that one going into the offseason. Look at what they do in the draft, see what they can do in free agency or something of that nature. Now it is time for our fantasy focus. For those of you people who are still alive in fantasy leagues that, for whatever insane, crazy reason, like to play into Week 17. I've never understood that, because most of the time the teams that make it to the Super Bowl of your fantasy league and you play into Week 17, the reason you got there was all those players you had that played from Week 1 to Week 16. But for some reason, most of them will be benched because their teams have probably made the playoffs and they want to rest their players. So instead, you're going to be sitting there trying to put together a team from your backups in the most important game of the fantasy season. But if you are playing in one of those games and you need to look for some sleepers, potentially off the waiver wire and whatnot, I have a few players for you. First off, Charles Clay. If you need a tight end who's going to be locked in and get you some points, maybe you're the guy who had Jordan Reed, who's fallen off the radar as of late. Maybe you're somebody who had Gronkowski or had Eifert. If you need a tight end, Charles Clay. Touchdowns in multiple weeks, 4 out of the 5 last week, touchdowns in the last 5 weeks. Amazing player. Good time to have him. Washington Redskins bringing out Paul Perkins, who is going to lead the team in touches in the backfield next week. Really an opportunity for him to shine, and in a team that is going to be very hungry to make the playoffs, a team that's going to need every ounce of production they can get. Paul Perkins is ready for a breakout week. And 2 players on the Seattle Seahawks. One, Alex Collins. For those of you who don't know who Alex Collins is, it sounds like Thomas Rawls may not be ready to go this week, and the Seahawks love to run the ball. They're going to need somebody to do it, and Alex Collins may be that guy. Alex Collins, if you're really stuck for a running back and you need to get somebody who's going to be a solid contributor this week, that may be the way to go. Along the same lines with the Tyler Lockett injury, I'm looking at Jermaine Kearse. Jermaine Kearse is a proven veteran over time. He has put up some really huge games in the past. Not as many this year because he's fallen behind Lockett in the depth chart. But with Lockett being out, here's the opportunity for Jermaine Kearse to step up and really take on that wide receiver number 2 role right at the right time of the year. And if you're looking for a deep sleeper, one who was absolutely turning heads at the start of the year, completely fell off the radar when he got a small injury, and now is trying to make a push to come back, I'm looking at Will Fuller with the Houston Texans. Will Fuller showed so much potential earlier in the season, and now we haven't heard from him in weeks. So we're hoping maybe this week, week 17, Will Fuller might be able to contribute in a big way. Now we're going to put a focus on your weekly fantasy lineups. For those of you who play in some of the weekly fantasy options out there, and you know who they are. I don't need to throw out their names. Why give them the free publicity? They're not paying me. Let's go with some dialed-in picks for this week's weekly fantasy lineups. If you're looking for a deal on a quarterback and you're looking for a great matchup, I have to love Sam Bradford versus the Bears, week 17. His price point right now on some of the biggest companies around $6,700. Not a bad price to pay for a guy who easily, against the Bears, could put up 3 touchdowns and 300 yards. We also have Jacquizz Rodgers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back, with a whole Doug Martin debacle down there. Who knows what's going on with him? Jacquizz Rodgers last week putting up solid numbers. And then you have to look at Charcandrick West. The running game in Kansas City has just been complete disarray all year. You go from the expectation that Jamal Charles is coming back and is solid, and Charles flounders. You end up having Spencer Ware come in, who looks like an absolute stud for several weeks, and then he gets hurt, and he never seems to come back to form. This past week, your leading rusher is a wide receiver. Multiple carries taken away from all the other players. But of all the running backs on the team, Charcandrick West quietly put up 14 touches last week, solid yardage, and this week looks like he may be your money player. As far as wide receivers go, Pierre Garçon. You're talking about a hungry team. The Redskins have to win this week to have any shot at the playoffs. Pierre Garçon's coming in at $5,600 on the weekly fantasy price list. Solid pick, solid play, especially if you want to allocate money elsewhere. If you wanted to put together a whole wide receiver tandem, I've got J.J. Nelson at $5,300 with the Arizona Cardinals. Now that you've moved on from Floyd, you have an opportunity to get more targets. Steal at $5,300. And the real sleeper, in my opinion, is Eli Rogers of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Eli Rogers coming in at $4,700. Save yourself some money on your starting lineup. Grab some of those top marquee players that you typically can't load up on when you're grabbing some of these value picks later. And in the tight end position, Jack Doyle, $4,600. Been a solid contributor. Dwayne Allen's supposed to be the star and the stud on the team, but for whatever reason, Jack Doyle finds a way to get himself in there and become a part of the passing game fairly consistently. So that's going to be it for this week's show. Be sure and tune in next week as we finalize the brackets for the playoffs. Try to make some predictions, see what we think is going to happen. We'd like to send out a special thanks this week to bensound.com, purpleplanet.com, and Monk Turner. They provide all of our music and sound effects used throughout today's show. And today's podcast was sponsored in part by Fafi Metal Detectors Plus. Whether you're the casual hunter, the energetic beachcomber, or the underwater enthusiast, Fafi detectors have solutions for all of your metal detecting needs. And to A&B Education of Lansdale, they bring intercultural education to talented students from around the world. We want to thank you for listening to today's podcast, and if you are an aspiring degree-seeking student looking for something at an institute of higher education, we encourage you to go to our website at www.frolifeplanning.com to learn more about what Mr. Fro can do for you. Remember, Fro Life Educational Planning is for today, for tomorrow, and for life with Fro Life. I'm Fred Froelich, better known as Mr. Fro, and I appreciate each and every one of you who make our show a part of your day, and I hope you'll subscribe to our feed through iTunes and Stitcher. Until next time, I want all of you to have a safe and happy New Year, and we'll see you again next week.